This week, what do you do when your customer point blank fails to pay you? And in this week's Profit Cash Growth Extra, a few tips for managing your screen time. Welcome to the Profit Cash Growth Podcast. This is the podcast for 6 and 7 figure business owners who are looking to grow a financially successful business. My co-host Claire Hancock is a finance director, chartered accountant and entrepreneur. And every week I'll be exploring guidance and frameworks designed to help you increase your profits, improve your cash flow and grow your business. So Claire, I found a new passion.
Have you?
Yeah, frozen pastries. Oh, it's my new favourite thing, this is. I think everybody should be aware of this. I was first introduced to it because Pret started selling their frozen almond croissants in Tesco's, and we saw them, didn't we? And since then, there's a whole plethora of frozen pastries, from pastel de noches to cinnamon swirls and they're all great. Fresh, hot pastries in the morning.
You have turned into a European, haven't you? You do have a little
Listen, this
pastry.
Is the crunch.
Yeah, you have turned into a European and you are getting quite fancy. And you've become quite partial to a breakfast pastry, literally every day of the week. Cinnamon swirls, pastel de nata.
Pastry and a coffee. It's how the Europeans do. I love it. And hot. I'm obsessed with this hot thing, aren't I? Like, I can't go into somewhere and have a cold, like, pan au chocolate. I need it hot.
But... food does taste better when it's hot, though. I watched a documentary once and it was all about why food does taste better when it's hot. And there is a scientific reason. It's because hot food the molecules in food are moving quicker when they're hot, which means that your taste buds can taste more of them. So it's actually a scientific fact that food tastes better when it's hot.
The irony of the fact that you just had a conversation with me about how I over-expand on things is quite funny, because that is just random levels of detail. Anyway, let's see what's going on in this week's News Story of the Week, yeah? So this week, it would be stupid of us not to pick up on the CrowdStrike IT outage, global IT outage that happened. So what do you think, Claire?
Yeah, it was quite bonkers, really, wasn't it, for
Crazy.
Almost the whole world to wake up one morning to find out that all these major systems like NHS and airports and, government bodies and things like that had all suffered this blue screen Microsoft issue where they weren't able to simply turn on their computers.
Yeah, and as I understand, this is all linked to, so the company's like an antivirus type company that the big corporations use, which is the irony, really, isn't it?
Well, this is the irony of it. It's like it was like meant to be like this next level protection that these organisations like the NHS, for example, would need, but because it was so specialist, and I think it's something that we maybe need to think a bit harder about as the world, that we've got these specialist companies that do these things, and they, like CrowdStrike, how many organisations should we allow to work with these big conglomerates? Because they're supposed to be there to protect us, but ultimately...
Yeah. If they fail, then they bring the whole thing down.
Yeah.
Eggs in one basket.
Exactly.
I think this is interesting because I think actually this pushes on to something broader around the way that the modern world's gone. I'm going a little bit off on a tangent here, but it does make sense. I was talking to you the other day, wasn't I, about something I watched from Warren Buffett about talking about the top 20 global companies in the world today and 30 years ago. And it was frightening. He said, how many of the top 30 companies in the world 30 years ago are still in the top 20 today? And the answer was 0. And even more frightening, I think over 60% of the companies 30 years ago were Japanese, and there isn't a single Japanese company. And
most of them were banks as well, weren't they? They were Japanese banks and finance institutions. And I was actually having a conversation with a friend yesterday about this, and I think it's quite interesting because we were actually on a train going through London, and it was quite stark on a sort of Wednesday morning at around 10 o'clock, going through like Tower Bridge and places like that, looking at Canary Wharf, and everywhere just looked empty. And I was thinking, in 30 years' time, will the UK be another Japan where, we're by no means a poor country, but we're just not...
Now. We've not had growth. Japan haven't had growth for 30 years. We haven't had growth for a decade now, and that could just go on for another 20 years, and we are the same people. We're just another Japan. I think we're primed for it, absolutely.
Anyway, CrowdStrike, Simon.
Anyway, my point.
What is your point?
You interrupted me. So my point was, the number one largest company in the world 30 years ago was basically worth £100 billion. Today, the number one company in the world is worth £3 trillion, only 30 years on. It is unbelievable, the consolidation into big corporates. And I think this goes back to what you're saying about we are putting so many eggs in those corporate baskets, and governments love it. They back these big corporates. They put the tax regime to work for these big corporates. We know that.
Yeah.
because they want it. But the danger is exactly this. And I say this to you a lot, don't I? That I think that, they've just gone through the COVID inquiry and they're talking about all these things we need to do to plan for the next COVID. I think we're missing a trick here. We need to be planning for the next tech strike. Our entire world is now wrapped into a few key tech players, and if they go down, we're all absolutely screwed, aren't we? So
I think one of the most staggering things that you mentioned about the whole CrowdStrike thing, and a lot of people probably won't be aware of this, that there was a staggering £6 million worth of cash. So people started flooding to cash machines,
thinking
that the banking system might go down, they might not be able to get their money. And I think, that really is quite scary, because if it had gone on a lot longer, or even, for example, it could have affected the media outlets more, and therefore information would be getting to the general public, and it could have created absolute mass hysteria potentially, and people could have flooded to these cash machines. It could have unstabilised our whole economy if they'd withdrawn too much money from the banks. And scenes that have occurred in Lebanon, for example, where the currency was devaluing so much and the banks just had to stop allowing people to take money out of the bank. You look at this happening to other countries like Japan, like Lebanon, like we just mentioned, and you think never in the UK. But
and we're trying to,
feels like we're on the brink of it.
Yeah, and we're very close to becoming that cashless society where what happens when there isn't a backup? And so how do small businesses prepare for, something like this happening? What is their manual processes in their business that if tech goes out for a number of days or weeks, how do they transact with their customers? And should they be thinking about that? Should they be planning for it? Or, can you forever plan for a million things that might happen once in a blue moon? What do you think about that?
I do think it does depend on your customer base and that type of thing. The reality is, my office is completely paperless. We don't have anything stored in paper. And the main reason we don't have anything stored in paper is because, firstly, it doesn't allow us to serve our customers. We can't be like, we can't complete that piece of work because so-and-so is working from home today and the piece of paper's in the office. It's just not practical. But also, I'm dealing with quite sensitive information, companies' finances, so we can't risk bits of paper being lying around or things like that. If we receive any post, and I'd say 99.9% of our post only comes from HMRC, which really annoys me because it's a government body and it should be digital, but that's another conversation. Sure. We scan it and we shred it. And that is how we deal with everything. And I'll be honest, I am not putting a single process in place to allow for a complete outage, something like not being able to log into Microsoft, because everything that we do is on Microsoft. So, but we do have data stored about our customers in multiple places. So, for example, we have our CRM system, we have our AML system where we need to do money laundering checks, and we've got customer information in there. So if one system went down, we would still be able to log on to another system and be able to at least contact a customer and explain what's happened. And we would never lose all of our customers' data. We have that backed up as well. But if we couldn't log on to Microsoft one morning, we'd be fucked.
But is there power in numbers? So the very fact that you're, with Microsoft is the fact that, do you take comfort in the fact that, the world is with Microsoft, so to speak. So, they would throw so much resource at fixing the problem as quickly as is humanly possible that you couldn't really be anywhere better. Like if you were with a smaller supplier or something like that, you perhaps wouldn't get that. Does that give you more comfort? Is that better or does that just make the problem worse because we're growing those eggs in one basket situation, the monopolisticness of our tech world?
Yeah, I mean, look, you've got to look at the likes of Microsoft and, Apple. They're the two big operating systems, aren't they? And, I don't think there's ever been anything, certainly in my lifetime, that I recall like this. So, yeah, from that perspective, we are worrying about Armageddon, and you have got to keep things in perspective, because if you plan for all these things, they're just an unnecessary distraction in your business. So there is an element of that in small businesses. Absolutely, big businesses should be planning for this, but small businesses, I'd say, completely wipe it from your memory and forget that it ever happened.
Interesting.
Don't stress about it.
Well, there you go. It's definitely one we had to touch on. I think there's a million different routes we could talk about this one for forever and probably cut it out into individual podcasts. But yeah, that's the CrowdStrike IT outage this week. So let's move on to this week's deep dive.
So this deep dive, Simon's going to share a little story with us, because you had a customer not pay you this week, didn't you, Simon?
I know, painful as well. And not just not pay me, but almost maliciously just refused to pay for no apparent reason. Basically, trying to cut a long story short, we run an estate agency, and under normal practice, it's the solicitor that pays our bill as the estate agency out of the funds of the whole transaction. This particular solicitor of this client, actually, they messed up a bit because they had somebody on long-term sick, and this person just happened to forget to put our invoice on the completion statement and therefore didn't pay us. But the customer was claiming that their arrangement with the solicitor was they would settle our bill. Now, the money had actually been, all of the money that would have paid a bill had been passed back to the customer as part of the transaction. So our client has had that money, and it's fairly straightforward. And they pretty much acknowledged that they'd had that money, but they'd spent it, they said. So they don't have it to spend our bill, to pay our bill. So
I mean, they said they spent it, but this is, £7,000. And I think if any of us had £7,000 accidentally land in our bank accounts, I don't think we would go out spending it straight away. And the story did change, to be fair. They initially they said, they paid off their mortgage. Well, they couldn't have paid off their mortgage. They've only just bought a new house. They've only just bought a new house, and you can't pay your mortgage off within 2 weeks of buying a new house. So that was a fabrication. And then, it was like an excuse after an excuse. Then it was debt consolidation, and then it was, we're not paying your bill because the solicitor's liable because they've made a mistake, etc., etc. So there was just this whole raft of excuses coming from this person, wasn't there? So
the bottom line is it's an absolute outrage that they're refusing to pay our bill. We're not culpable or responsible. We've done our job, and we have a direct contractual agreement with the client. The fact that the monetary transaction often goes through the solicitor is neither here nor there. So
that's an arrangement between your client and their solicitor, and it does not impact you whatsoever. They're still liable for their bill.
So for everybody else, and myself, Claire, we're going to work through the steps that I should be following now with this client. If I start with, obviously, the fact that we've asked them to pay and they've effectively refused, they basically come back and said, we're in a dispute with the solicitor. The solicitor should have paid you, and we feel like they still should be paying you. So we can't pay you, and we don't have the money to pay you because, our understanding is that they would pay you. We've gone back to them and give them a little bit of time to sort of say, happy for you to draw a line under that dispute. We've offered them 7 days. They said they won't be there in 7 days, so we extended it to 14 days, and that's where we are at the moment.
Yeah, so it can be quite worrying when a customer doesn't pay you, particularly, in your scenario, it was about £7,000, wasn't it? So it's a significant amount of money, but it's not going to be, if that customer never paid you, it wouldn't sink your business. But particularly for B2B businesses where, often debts are in tens, if not potentially hundreds of thousands of pounds, then if a customer doesn't pay you, it can be incredibly worrying.
Yeah. It's so what's the difference between B2B and B2C in terms of the processes that you would follow? Is there a difference?
Well, in short, no, there is no difference. At the end of the day, if somebody doesn't owe you any money, if somebody doesn't pay you when they owe you money, regardless of whether it's a business or an individual that you're chasing, you are legally entitled to pursue that person for your money.
Right. Okay.
So in a nutshell, there is no difference. What is different is that there is a little bit more protection of consumers. So the approach generally when a business owes you money is much more about how each individual business wants to handle it. There's not as much regulation protecting it. And often the right approach to take is about preserving that long-term commercial arrangement with your customer. If your customer hasn't paid you, you need to make a choice. Do you want to work through this with them and hope that they can be a customer long-term with you? And that's often the approach that's taken. Whereas,
is that like not putting too much pressure on the fact they've not paid you, that type of thing, to try and preserve a longer term relationship with them? Is that kind of what you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. And it often comes down to understanding what's the reason they can't pay you, because often small businesses can't pay you because one of their customers hasn't paid them.
So it's a timing issue, not a refusal to pay.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not often that you get businesses that just don't pay you and they're like, we're just not paying you. We could pay you, but we've decided to keep the cash in our bank and we're not paying you. That's quite rare. It's often caused by a knock-on impact down the supply chain. And it's normally a big business or a council sitting at the end that hasn't paid somebody, and then that just keeps hopping down the supply chain.
Yeah.
That person then can't pay their suppliers, and that person then can't pay their suppliers, and that person and so on and so on. And it's normally very small businesses at the end.
So our client is refusing / can't pay us. They don't have the money to pay us. That's where they're at.
Well, they've said they don't.
Yeah,
and
so
that's the difference. So business is all about preserving that long-term commercial arrangement, whereas with individuals, generally, the letter of the law and how consumer law and protection works is that you need to be seen to be supporting the individual. So whatever their needs are. So if they genuinely are having issues paying their debt, then really you need to say, okay, well, what can you afford and what support do you need? And remind them of their consumer rights and remind them of their legal rights and remind them of all of the things in place that your business has to support them.
Even though because we're involved in this, we know that they've just had a transfer of £500,000 into their bank account.
Yeah. And this is where it's like, okay, you at the end of the day, the first thing that I said to you, Simon, was you need to firstly understand exactly what's going on. You need to understand why they're not paying your bill. Are they not paying your bill because they just are hoping that the solicitor's going to pay it and they're just buying time? Are they not paying your bill because they really can't pay it? So regardless of whether you're dealing with a business or individual, it's really about understanding the facts and laying those down. But then you also do need to give quite clear communication. That's really important, is you need to make it really clear what you expect from them and when by. So it's no good just sending an email saying you need to pay our bill, otherwise we're going to take you to court. You need to say you must pay this sum by this date, otherwise these are the actions that we will take.
Okay, fine. So if my next move is we've given them 14 days, if we get to the end of the 14 days, we send them another note saying we still haven't received payment of your bill, the time scale that we've given you has now run out. What do I do now? Do I give them more time scale before we take the next step, or do we take the next step?
So the next step would be to take them to court. That's the reality. If you feel like you've exhausted the steps, there is the potential of taking them to mediation, but often in these scenarios, mediation is just somebody else getting involved, and often it's best if there's a dispute.
Yeah, I guess like what you mediate against, they don't have an issue with the service we've provided or any acknowledgement that we haven't done that.
So if there is no dispute, they haven't made a complaint about your service or your product, and they're not disputing whether they've ever received it or the amount that you're charging. So there's no dispute whatsoever. Then you just simply need to take them to court. Yeah. And it used to be referred to as small claims court. That's generally what it means, but it can be used for quite large debts these days. I mean, I'm not sure if there is a limit, but certainly I've pursued debts of six figures through small claims court before.
Right.
So, that would unfortunately be the next step, is to go to small claims court. And what you need to do is, most of it can be dealt with online. You just simply fill out an online form. You just provide the evidence of the goods or service that you provided, so a copy of the invoice, a copy of the contract if you've got that, and communication that you've had with them. And really, what you're looking to make sure you've got covered off is that you can demonstrate that you've sent the invoice. So that can be via email. So you would attach a copy of the email and a copy of the invoice. Demonstrate that you've chased them and you've reminded them of the invoice is overdue, when it's due by, and the amount that's due. And then what we would normally call a letter before action, which is the final reminder that says, if you do not pay, we will be taking you to court. Okay,
fine. And is there a cost to that? And what is the cost to us as a business?
So there is.
Can we get that cost back from them? I mean, what's we don't want to ideally be out of pocket here, do we?
Yeah, so this is often where I think people are quite concerned that, I don't want to go to court because I'm going to have to get a lawyer involved and it's going to be expensive. And you absolutely don't need to get a lawyer involved in this stage.
I don't.
No, you don't. You can do this yourself. The small claims court is designed for individuals to act for themselves without a lawyer. That's, it's very straightforward. The form that you need to fill out is not complicated, and the information that you need to attach is not complicated either. You just simply need to attach your communication with your customer. And if you have debt of less than £300, then the fee is like £35. Okay, so it's really quite cheap. And if that goes up to £455, if your debt is up to £10,000. Now, when you go over £10,000, then moves to a percentage, which is 5% of the claim, up to £10,000.
Got it.
And so some of the fees can get quite significant. You are expected to pay the fee up front, and it is reclaimable from the defendant should you be successful in your claim. And having to lodge £10,000 to make a court claim can be quite scary. So there are
to take that first step.
They can help you as well. If the fee is large, then there are ways where you don't have to pay up front and they can support you with that. The court will support you.
Interesting. Great. So obviously if we can do all this element ourselves, what and when would we use things like debt collection agencies, and what are they there for?
Yeah. So often people think that you need a debt collection agency to do this.
Would be a misconception that I would have thought.
Yeah, and what debt collection agencies are good at is they are good at dealing with those difficult conversations with customers. They're actually quite good at negotiating, and often a debt collection agency can get the customer to pay without going to court. However, to the debt collection agency, sometimes they work on a fixed fee, sometimes they take a percentage of what's claimed, and you don't need to use them. You just need to use your own skill set. As a business owner, you're a fairly capable person, and you're quite capable of picking up the phone to somebody and having a conversation with them and saying the things that need to be said in a logical, calm way and negotiating with your customer to try and get the right outcome.
I guess until you've done this process, it's like anything. If you do this process 1, 2 or 3 times, by the time you've done it 3 times, you know it inside out and it's not scary. I guess to a lot of business owners, the first time they have to do this, trying to get the education, the knowledge, trying to navigate it. I guess that's the purpose in this particular episode today, isn't it? Is that, it gives people an element of, this isn't scary, it's really straightforward, this is the way to do it. And that's step 1 for them. And then they can, they can do it once and then they know.
Yeah, so the debt collection agencies, often they're actually just not doing anything legal. They're just negotiating with the customer, and they're just putting that constant pressure on that customer, regular letters, regular phone calls to try and get them to pay you. And often that in itself is successful, and a business owner is more than capable of doing that themselves.
Yeah.
And then the debt collection agency will then often pursue it through the courts on your behalf as well. So they'll get normally a solicitor involved, which incurs additional fees, and go down that route. And, I think there is a lot of bad connotations about debt collection agencies. I think we imagine like bailiffs and things like that. But at the end of the day, a debt collection agency can't send a bailiff in unless there's been some sort of court order.
Yeah.
So the debt collection agency can manage the small claims process on your behalf. And then if after you've got the court order, the customer still is not paying you, then you've got options such as attachment of earnings order, which is if somebody has a job, you can actually get an order that your debt is collected from their salary, so their employer has to pay you. There's bailiffs, there's potentially bankruptcy. If somebody's not paying your bill, potentially you could seek to get them declared bankrupt, or if it's a business, you could seek to have them liquidated. So there's all sorts of options to get to, but they're so extreme.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds like debt collection agency sounds like any sort of outsourcing function you would do in your business. It's basically there because, you don't think you will have the focus to constantly chase this when you're a busy business and you've got other things going on. So it just allows somebody else to really focus on it and carry that through if you don't think you're going to stay on track with it.
Absolutely. But I mean, this doesn't require much skill. This is just a communication and negotiation skill. So, most businesses probably listening to this have got a PA or somebody in the office doing admin, and it's absolutely that person that should just, their job every day or 2 or 3 days a week needs to be to make regular contact with this person that owes you debt, understand what's happening, agree the next steps, agree the next actions, remind them of, if you don't pay by this date, we will. Just keep putting that pressure on. It doesn't require more skill than that. So
your recommendation would be not to use a debt collection agency. Is there a time when that recommendation would change in your view, and or a certain type of business or size or something where you think it is appropriate, or would you always say, no, do it yourself in-house?
I think when I've used debt collection agencies before has been when the debt when I'm finding it incredibly difficult to get any communication out of the individual. So if they're just not communicating with you, they're not responding, or they've gone AWOL, you don't have the correct addresses for people and things like that, debt collection agencies can be fantastic because they will hunt down that individual for you and find them, and then make sure that the paperwork is served correctly and all of that type of thing. So if you've got somebody that's been difficult and quite evasive, then I would say maybe a debt collection agency is likely to get more out of them than you are.
And I guess that's you do see that a lot in the consumer world, don't you, where they'll just ghost the whole thing, they'll just not respond to a single thing. It's the easiest thing for them to do until things get serious.
And also often, we had this conversation when we were talking about this debt, and I said, if they don't pay you, we would just issue a small claims court against them. And you were like, oh, but that's really mean. That's going to affect them for the rest of their life. And actually, it doesn't necessarily, because you issue all your paperwork, you raise your case with the court, and then they will write to the individual and explain that this case has been raised against them, and they have a certain amount of time to respond and or pay the debt.
And if before CCJ comes.
Exactly.
I understand that.
So there's a whole process that goes through before it gets to that formal CCJ, which sits on somebody's. And
I'd love to know what
file.
the stats are, but I imagine they're absolutely enormous percentages that just get sorted the first time that letter goes out, because people just shit themselves. And
absolutely.
Anybody would damage their credit history. Amazing. Thanks, Claire. Well, I am off to get my $6,000 back. So thank you very much for your help on that one. And let's move on to this week's Profit Cash Growth Extra. So this week, am excited because I've got a little tool. Now, we all know that human beings struggle a little bit with willpower, and we all know how much technology is taking over our lives. So, we're busy business owners and we spend a hell of a lot of time on our phones, don't we, Claire?
Yeah, it's really difficult,
enormous,
isn't it, to switch off? Not only do you want to keep up with friends and family, we've got all sort of like business news and wild news and
your whole
like
life's on your phone.
But
it can affect everything else around you, and you do need that time away from it. So I've bought a timed padlock. This is an amazing thing. So basically, it's a padlock where you can lock things away and set a timer on it that keeps the padlock locked until the end of that time. So you can lock all your phones in a box, stick a 3-hour timing on it in the evening, and guess what? You can't access your phone. It's a physical barrier. I found this fascinating. And you can buy these on Amazon. There's loads of them available from China. They're not particularly expensive, but they're a cool little fun device to try to gamify the idea of being able to sort of have time away from screens and various other things. Now,
this is, at the end of the day, a business podcast, Simon. So we've got to bring this back around to the business world, I think. And our recommendation for using this is actually team meetings. I'm a bit of a stickler for people turning up to team meetings with their laptops and their phones because they just get distracted, and it makes a team meeting longer than it needs to be and doesn't really get the right outcome from it. So I think get a box in the middle of the room, put your laptops, put your phones in it, anything that is not absolutely essential for this meeting, and lock it for the 30 minutes, the 45 minutes, 60 minutes, however long it is going to be. And it just turns it into a bit of fun, really. Everybody's in the same boat, including you as the business owner, because often I've criticised my team members for bringing their bloody laptops in, and then I sit there on my laptop myself. So you do have to make sure you hold yourself accountable too. But it just makes it a little bit fun, creates a bit of an atmosphere, and just really hammers home that message that you're wanting your team to really focus.
And if you're a parent, this is great for kids as well, because you can lock the sweets and chocolate box up for 2 or 3 days at a time, and only let them have them every couple of days. So there's a million different uses for this type of technology, but I think it's a fantastic little tool. It's a bit of fun, and go and check it out. You can buy one on Amazon, eBay, and all those various places. So thanks for joining us for this week's podcast. As always, if you've outgrown your current accountant and you want to chat with Claire and the team at Profit Cash Growth, you can go to profitcashgrowth.com, check out the website, have a look at what those guys do there, and we will see you all again next week.